Roughly a decade ago, I was witness inside GM to one of the biggest PR events that the company had ever manufactured, and that was the day that Oprah gave away 276 Pontiac vehicles to her audience. And everyone in the room got a vehicle, and every one of them went crazy. And coming out of that, there was a ton of media coverage, a lot of buzz for the brand at the time, and it's because at the time, GM really manufactured a moment, and I think that's been a historical thing that we have done and have gotten paid to do in the PR business for a while now. If you fast forward then to February this year at the Super Bowl, there was another stunt with a little bit of a different twist, and that was Oreo's Dunk in the Dark. And what is interesting about the Oreo case, which really got the marketing community pretty fired up, is that really what that was about was trying to capture the moment. And I think a lot of us in the room have been exposed to a lot of situations with our clients where we are chasing the cultural moment, we're trying to capture it for social media purposes, and that's really kind of a lot of the conventional thinking that goes into real time, at least in the corridors that we've been in recently. And that's what really brings us to the topic of this panel. We think that there's something more significant going on with this notion of real time and how technology is really transforming our world. Something deeper, more fundamental than stunts and getting PR for the sake of generating PR. And it's really about competing in the moment. So how can we as PR leaders really work inside of our organizations and for our clients to really understand what are these bigger forces in play that are really warranting a different competitive dynamic out there. And that's why we thought it would be great to have Douglas join us, because he's really a one-of-a-kind thinker on this. He is definitely a one-of-a-kind author on this. And he's really someone who I wish I had as a professor in college, because it's not only what he thinks, but how he thinks. He takes both a deep view of things as well as a broad view of things. And I think, importantly for the business that we're in right now, he definitely challenges conventional wisdom. And so he's been doing this for years. He has a pretty incredible resume. His first book on internet culture, Siberia, was actually canceled by Bantam in 1992 because the publishers thought that the internet was a fad and it would go away and there wouldn't be a market for his book. He predicted the dot-com crash a couple of years in advance, and I think you had mentioned a few weeks within the accuracy of that. But he's also predicted things like the housing bubble hitting us, predicted that. And he's also changed some of the vernacular that we use. So he's coined terms like media virus, digital natives, and social currency back in 1995. And he's a really influential person who I think is going to add a lot to the conversation today. So without further ado, Douglas Rushkoff.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks, Gail and Mr. Holmes, for having me here. It's a good opportunity to interact with an important industry that I think is at the high leverage point in our potential as a culture and society to make a big transition. The easiest way for me to explain what I think real time is and what our confusion about real time is really to share with you the example of Real Housewives of Orange County. I don't know if you guys have seen this show. It's a reality program about these women who have meals together and then fight. And my wife watches it. She sits in bed watching it, so I end up having to watch it too. And I watch TV. I'm a media theorist, so I watch TV as a communications person, looking at why are communications breaking down between these women so often, right? They have the same socioeconomic background, they live in the same region of the country, they speak the same language, they have the same level of wealth, they dress the same. Why are they so confused? And as I watched them, I realized the problem is they had so much Botox and plastic surgery that their faces can't register the expressions appropriate to the things that they're saying. Right? One of them said, oh, my daughter's going in for cancer testing. And the other one said, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. And the first one, they take her off on the side, and she's, oh, so upset. Oh, I don't believe her. And what I realized, the problem with these women is what they've done is by trying to lock their faces down at age 29, right? They've made themselves unavailable to the moment that they're actually in. Right? And that's what made me think about time and think back to the ancient Greeks who actually had two different words for time. We say real time as if, oh, time is this thing. No, they had two different notions of time. There's chronos, which is time on the clock, right? What time did you crash the car? I crashed the car at 4:01. Right? But then there's this other kind of time called kairos, which is more like a readiness, right? It's human time. It would be, if you crash the car at 4:01, fine, that's time on the clock. But kairos would be, what time do you tell Dad that you crashed the car? Right, 4:17? It has nothing to do with the clock, right? You tell Dad you crashed the car after he's had his drink and before he's opened the bills, right? It's that sweet spot of readiness that only a human being can understand. Right? Well, the problem with the Real Housewives is that they've locked down Chronos. They're chasing Chronos so desperately that they've lost Kairos, that they've lost actual time that we're in. Right? And this is the problem I think that most industries, including yours, are making. Right? For me, it was the internet. Right? When the net first came around, we're talking about early 90s, I looked at this, I was a slacker, and I looked at the net and thought, oh, this is going to be a great harbinger of slack. Because of the internet, we're all going to get to work at home, in our own time, in our underwear. You remember that early net. And it's because we were using the net asynchronously. Right? The way we used the net was remember these days, you would want to go to a bulletin board and participate in a conversation. So you would turn on your computer, you'd plug it into this little box called a modem. Remember those? It would dial up onto the internet. You would download the conversation, you would disconnect from the internet, you'd read the conversation, you'd think about it and think, how do I want to participate? What do I want to say? It was a little like chess by mail, right? You had all the time in the world, and you would spend an hour, 2 hours, or all night writing this brilliant paragraph. Then you'd pop back into the modem and you'd upload your paragraph into the conversation and you'd wait and see. And you sounded so smart, right? We all sounded as smart as Christopher Hitchens on the internet because we all had all the time in the world. Now imagine that. The internet was a place where we sounded smarter than we do in real life. It's odd, right? But it really was. That was the potential. But what happened? How did we use the internet? Well, Wired magazine came along. We had been in a stock market doldrums since 1987, and they saw in the internet the new poster child for the NASDAQ Stock Exchange. Right? We had stopped growing. We couldn't grow as an economy anymore, or even our technologies, our biotech wasn't even growing. We couldn't go to new little countries and extract minerals. We had nowhere left to expand. But once they saw the internet, they thought, here's the new story. Even though we can't expand territorially, even though the World Bank and IMF can't expand anymore, we have a new territory, human attention. Right? We started talking about people's time in terms of eyeball hours. That's not a joke. That was a real term we used. We tried to make our websites as sticky as possible to extract as many eyeball hours out of people because time, human time, became the new commodity. And so we ended up with technology strapped to our bodies, and we live in this weird, always-on reality, right? Where when anybody wants to tweet or Facebook update or send an email or ping us in any number of ways, this thing's supposed to vibrate and let us know, right? We live in this state of constant, perpetual emergency interruption. Right? It's a state of consciousness that used to be endured only by 911 operators and air traffic controllers. And they only did it 3 or 4 hours a day, and they took drugs to get over it. And we do it 24/7. We're just constantly interrupted, as if it's when I was a kid, the only emergency interruption you would get would be, you're on a phone call, and the operator breaks in because grandma's dying. Remember those? Oh, we got to break into your call. Young people won't remember. There used to be these phones that plugged in the wall. It was another world. But on a body level, what does that mean to be interrupted? Emergency, emergency, emergency. Grandma's dying, grandma's dying, grandma's dying, grandma's dying. Right? You end up getting what they call, phantom vibration syndrome, where you think your cell phone is vibrating in your pocket even though it's somewhere else entirely. Do you ever get that one? That's not an adaptation to technology. That's a maladaptation to technology. That's the breakdown of your nervous system. Right? Now, communications industry, unfortunately, is falling into that same trap, I think. See, what the digital evangelists and the digital business people and digital companies have done is, rather than embracing the possibilities of a digital culture, right, and using these technologies asynchronously, what they've decided to do is to reify the worst of the dying industrial age model. Rather than embracing a digital age, they're saying, how can we use this technology to amplify the agenda of this obsolete, dead 13th century printing press era economic operating system, which is actually over. And we're moving into something else. And because of that clash, we end up in present shock. Right? It's this clash between Chronos and Kairos, this idea that the metrics and the Chronos and the clock time just needs to be amped up, right, through some kind of steroidal use of technology, rather than embracing what's possible here, right, which I would argue is a genuine peer-to-peer connection between people and people reclaiming their own time. To understand where communications went off and what it is that we're trying to do, we have to remember what the communications industry was invented to do. Right? What was before the communications industry? What was before branding? What was before the corporation? And if you understand that, if we can take a look at that, we can understand, oh, well, some little possibility of what might be ahead. You know, the way people used to interact, the way people used to buy and sell things was at the bazaar. Remember the bazaar, the late Middle Ages? It came after the Crusades when all those guys went off and died, but some of them came back and brought stuff from other places, new technologies, new techniques, new spices and things, and they traded them at the bazaar. And the bazaar was an amazing economic engine. The bazaar led to the rise of the peasants into the middle class. It was a peer-to-peer affair where everybody talked about everything, right? Oh, who's got good meat? Who's got good shoes? It was this weird sort of non-fiction communication space. It was a peer-to-peer place where you talked about who's having sex with who's going to what church, what politics do we have, what meat do we want to buy, whose shoes do you want to buy, whose shoes don't you want to buy. The problem was, as the peasant class became really wealthy and was trading and doing all this stuff, using local currencies and developing their crafts, they were getting rich. Right? They were working 2 or 3 days a week at that point. They were doing fine. The problem was the aristocracy was getting poor. Right? So what did they do? You know, they invented two, well, kind of great inventions. The chartered corporation, which is a chartered monopoly, which meant no one could do business in an industry unless they had specific mandate from the king. And the second was central currency, which meant you can't do peer-to-peer interaction without borrowing money from a central treasury. Right? You had to use coin of the realm. Now, it was all right, right? Things grew. It was great for an expansionist world where we're taking over other countries because the economy has to grow. But the problem was it also depended on disconnecting people from one another. It depended on undermining those relationships that we used to have. Like if I used to buy oats from Chris, right? I would know. I would go to Chris's oat stand. I'd buy oats, give me the oats. We'd have a conversation. If the oats were bad, I knew who he was. I'd go back and, you gave me bad oats. Right? And he needs me to have good oats. Not just because he's going to lose me as a customer if his oats are bad, but because I might make wagon wheels in that town. And if I'm sick on his bad oats while I'm making wagon wheels for his wife's wagon, he's in trouble in more ways than one. So we had an interdependence, a codependence as members of a community. Right? Now with mass production in the new scheme, I'm getting my oats from 2,000 miles away, and that plain brown box of oats comes into the room. How am I supposed to relate to that? I buy my oats from Chris, not from this box. This is where the brand came around. We put a picture of a Quaker on the box. Everybody likes Quakers, right? We'll put a little mole on the Quaker. We'll make him someone everyone can relate to. So now there's a Quaker on the box. Oh, there's a Quaker on the box. Oh, there's Chris. I'll say, look at this Quaker, though. Right? Now, if I don't have a real relationship with the Quaker, what do? I don't have that's just a picture. Mass media. Right? Mass media didn't come around because Lucille Ball was sitting in her cabana in California saying, I want to reach the world with my comedy. They said, oh, let's create television and radio for her. No. It was so the picture of the Quaker could get to me and create a pre-existing relationship. And then brand people came around and created mythologies. So now I have a relationship to a story and an image that supersedes my relationship with this guy. Sorry. Right? And we have the traditional narrative really rules this entire brand universe. Right? Create a character the audience likes, put that character into some kind of a danger, and then give them the solution, which is the product or the answer. Right? The girl, she's going to go to the prom. She's excited. Oh, she has a zit. What's she going to do? She pops it. She does it. All the bad things happen. Oh, no, no, until she gets to the top of the inclined plane of anxiety, and then, oh, she discovers Oxy-5 or Clearasil or something. We see the psychedelic colors go through her body, and we get relief. Right? That's since Aristotle. That's the way we tell stories. Crisis, climax, sleep. Right? The sort of male orgasm curve of narrative, linear narrative storytelling. And it's what ruled our whole culture, right? Everything. We're going to get to the Mashiach, Messianic age. Every movement from communism to capitalism to everyism is we're going to go through this terrible time and push and push and push and get to the end. It's a campaign, right? I saw that, so it's not there anymore. There's the word strategy, right? And that it infected this industry too. You're going to have a strategy and a campaign, right? The strategy, what is a campaign about? Getting to the end and winning. You don't want to win a campaign, because what does that do? It ends the campaign. You don't want to end, you want to keep going. Ending is great for Chronos. What time are you going to finish? Oh, good, done. But we're talking about moving from this beginning, middle, end world into something else, and that's what the net does. Right? The net breaks this paradigm. The net breaks the captive spell of the Aristotelian narrative arc up there. Instead of watching this commercial, the girl gets the first pimple, boom, I use my remote control and I'm gone. Right? I don't have to go up like the old days and turn the channel and do the rabbit ears and everything else that led to a nice, well-behaved attention span. Right? But instead of embracing that, right, instead of embracing the new kind of peer-to-peer sideways communication, this reification of the bizarre that we're getting on the internet, between everything from Burning Man and Etsy and maker movements and all these cultures, what the communications industry is trying to do is to somehow preserve that old narrative, preserve these old techniques. I hear people talking, oh, the internet's great because now we can have a conversation with our consumer. She can talk to us and we can talk to her. That's not what the net is for. People are talking to each other on the net. They don't want to talk to a brand. Right? The brand can facilitate that conversation, but you can't talk, a corporation cannot talk to people. People can talk to people. Or they want to make up for that collapse in narrative through big data. What is big data is sort of this fantasy of time travel, right? Where you use data from the past to somehow predict a future before the people get there. And what are you doing really in that point? No matter how good your data is, how good your predictive models are, you're driving through the rearview mirror. Yeah, you can find the most likely outcome for 80% of people, but what about the other 20? You can make them, you can push them to act in the most probable course, but then you lose the novelty. Right? You lose new outcomes. Or you can use algorithms. Great, you can use algorithms to predict where things are going, and then where's the competitive advantage? Then you're only as good as your algorithm company. Right? And then you're not trusting the innovative potential of the actual human beings in your company. You know, and it leads to a really weird world with all these companies, and they come to me all the time, oh, we want to be transparent, we want to do this. I got a call from a television manufacturer. I pick up the phone, the guy says, oh, I'm the CEO of an American television manufacturer, and we want to become more transparent. We want to be less Saatchi and more Craigslist. That's the way he put it. That's his way of understanding transparency. I'm like, really, you make televisions, huh? And I already knew there are no American television manufacturers. She says, oh, well, we don't actually make the televisions. We outsourced that to Korea a few years ago. Well, then you do your design? No, we don't actually do the design. A company in San Francisco does that. Well, do you do your fulfillment? Well, no, actually, UPS and Amazon and all, they take care of that. Do you do your marketing? No, we got an Omnicom company. Well, what do you do? How am I going to help make a company transparent if all we're going to show is a couple of people doing spreadsheets inside? Right? They need old-style branding and communications and public relations, where public relations is the barrier between you and the world. where it's the opaque story rather than the thing. That doesn't work. That doesn't work in an internet era. You can't be transparent with that. It's not a world, this is not a world where people really care about what the Keebler elves had for breakfast, right? They want to know what's inside the cookie. The brands, the myths dissolve in this space. And ones who understand that, the sort of more data types, they try to manage this weird real-time data chase. They end up in this feedback loop with themselves. They use all these tools to monitor the social activity. Oh, look, they're tweeting about this, so now we're going to do that. And oh, they're social mediaing about that. And oh, these connections happen there. That's a feedback loop. You don't even know cause and effect anymore. Right? Are they tweeting because of what you said, or did you say what you say because of what they tweeted? And are they even hearing you? No. The possibility here, and this is the scary one, right? And companies don't want to do it because they don't have any faith in their own competency. The social possibility in an age of now, this Tao of Now, is to actually make the communication begin in the competency of the company. Right? You can't communicate for a company. The people in the company can communicate what the company is doing. Only we're really afraid of that. Right, the new structure of a company is much more like a mandala, where at the middle of the mandala are the most qualified people, like the R&D people who are actually coming up with the stuff, the jobs that everybody in the public wants to have, because these are the cool guys. And concentric rings around those folks of people that are protecting that culture. Right, one of those rings is the most ardent consumers, who are who? The most ardent consumers are the people who want to work in there. Right, the metric you should be using to measure the success of a PR campaign is how many unsolicited resumes have been slid under the door at that company. Who wants to work there? Who wants to be part of that culture? Right, the company is not communicating some benefits. The company is the living, breathing culture. It's the nexus. It's the locus of the culture of that industry. The second thing that happens if you're doing your work right, is the brand, instead of the brand being about fostering the disconnection between people, the brand fosters the connection between people. I mean, how many companies, and unfortunately, are still dependent on keeping producers disconnected from consumers so they can be that brand in the middle? Or keeping people isolated from each other so they buy more stuff. I mean, think of the average blue jeans commercial. What does it say? Wear these blue jeans and you will get laid, right? Now, if you have a girlfriend and you're sitting on the couch watching TV with your girlfriend, you see that commercial, does that work on you? No. Of course not. I'm wearing these jeans and I'm getting laid. No, that commercial needs an isolated consumer. That entire media culture needs isolated people. And the computer's pretty good at that, at keeping people apart. No, and finally, what you need to do is convert your communication strategy from the story, which was great for the era of the book, really, to the experience, which is more suited to the era of the video game. Right? A story is about being closed. How are we going to get to the end? A good video game, like a fantasy role-playing game, is not about winning the game and ending the play. A good game is about keeping the play alive as long as possible. How creative can we be to keep that going? And that's more consonant with the values of a world that is no longer obsessed with conquest, but is beginning to become concerned about sustainability. How long can we keep this thing going? This isn't about lip service to some environmental goal. This is about sustainable practices in the bigger sense, that we want this to keep going. It's not about the short-term win. And finally, it's changing your role from that of the authors of experience to collaborators in experience. It's a very big difference. Right? No one is listening to authors anymore or authorities. The minute you're an authority on something, you're gone. But people do want to collaborate. See, what I'm talking about is the possibility. It's not a certainty, but it's a strong possibility that human beings are returning to real time. Right, that they're becoming less creatures of the clock, less creatures of Chronos, particularly as they get unemployed. And they're reconnecting with some of the natural rhythms that actually drive human behavior, whether it's day and night, phases of life. Corporations can't live in real time. They never could. They never will. The humans inside them can. But corporations can't live in the real world. Computers don't live in the real world. Computers live in Chronos. They're stuck there. Which is why the big advocates of computers, the ones who really want to somehow get them humanized, get them somehow in here, they believe in the singularity. They think that human beings are only important insofar as we were able to bring the evolution of data to the next stage. And now we're going to hand off information to the computers who are going to take it, and we might as well be irrelevant. Right? That's not a pro-human message. And I'm pro-human. I'm on Team Human here. And corporations end up stuck, they have to be, in Chronos. They live in Chronos. They only understand numbers, metrics. That's all they have, and that's fine. But the people in them are human. And what we're moving into is a human-driven age. It really is digital. What does digits mean? Digits, digital, people doing stuff, making things again. In the PR industry, I think, is the high leverage point in this. I really mean that, which is why I'm happy to get to be here. This is an industry fathered by a man, Ed Bernays, who believed that people were too stupid to run their own lives. Right? You've read his stuff. That was his whole thing. That people can't be trusted with the fate of our world. We're going to need a benevolent elite to decide what happens, and then a PR industry to convince them of that fact. That's an interesting legacy to come from. But it's one that you have to flip, right? Because we're moving back to the bazaar. So we need to let go of the stories we've been using to try to convince people of stuff. We need to put down the Botox, right? And stop trying to preserve this obsolete industry of public relations, right? And embrace the possibilities. I think what we can do is move from a storytelling industry to one that's much more like game design, where you're actually creating the landscape on which people will interact with each other. And if you learn how to do that, you will be communicating so much more than you could with this old style of broadcasting your company's messages to some audience of people. What you'll be doing is, instead of working against, a 100-year or 200-year procession towards greater connection between people, you'll be working to help foster it. Okay, let's do our thing together. Thanks for listening to that.
All right.
All right.
Okay, so Douglas gave us, I think, a lot of angles into a conversation. So what we thought we would do is spend a few minutes just going maybe a bit deeper into a couple topics that you hit on that are very important to the people in this room, and then we'll open it up for some questions from you all on the floor. Maybe starting at maybe a higher level, because a lot of the people in this room and beyond spend a lot of time trying to find those stories and find those connection points, and through that really convey competitive advantage that these institutions have. And I read something recently from a Harvard Business School prof that said the era of competitive advantage is over because of all these real-time factors and technology and speed to market and competitive forces are just turning our whole world upside down. And that, I think, leads to the question of planning. When we're at the table, not just talking about communications, but talking about policy and business decisions, where do you see PR fitting into that to maybe be more transient in how we think about things, be more innovative from a business practice standpoint to make the job a bit easier to make those connections happen?
Well, I mean, we're speaking in closed company, except for the whole world. I think PR has to move from communications focus to an operational focus. The way that companies talk now is with the thing they do, rather than what they say about it. I don't know who Beyonce's singing for, this stuff. It's, or even, there's this, when I say operational, then for PR people it becomes, we can do the rainbow cookie for Oreo. And it's like, yeah, on a communications level that's operational, but it's got to be operational on an operational level. What are the, you guys know better than the people in the company how the public is relating to the company, how the public is relating to their products, to their actions, to the things they do. So on the one hand, yeah, it's triple bottom line and all that, but on the other hand, on the more important hand, it's looking at how can we marry the operations of this company to the actual public, to the actual audience, and they can't kick you out of that conversation because they are lost. They are lost. You are really, if anything, you are the only people who can save them from their own abhorrence of their competencies. These companies are ready to outsource their core competency. Where if you are the ones who need to reconnect, and this is the hard part, the people at the heart of the R&D of the company back with the people that we call the public. And once you can create that communication channel, the rest kind of fills in by itself.
Yeah, and I guess, going through, again, some of the points you made, and you outline it in one of the 5 great chapters in the book, just the whole notion of the collapse of narrative. There are all these great things happening in organizations that we work for and we represent. But you're saying that just the way that we interact with media changes the way of how we communicate all those great things that are happening. So the way that you describe it in the book is just we have a collapse of the narrative structure that we've been working within, for years and years now. What do you do once you find all those nuggets in the way that you look at things?
Well, it's interesting. There's 2 things. I mean, one, it relates back to this first idea that he was saying about the inability to have competitive advantage. Right? Competitive advantage is based in results. So does this one work better than that one? Well, neither works, or this one worked better than that one last week, and that one works better than this one this week. So your competitive advantage from a narrative standpoint, from a beginning, middle, end, what were your results? What happened? What are your metrics? Those go away. But your competitive advantage from the social standpoint, from the people, from the cultural standpoint, that stays. Right? So when you're trying to have a competitive advantage in say a medical field where there's equivalent drugs, it's who's created the better culture, who's created the better support community, who's created the better dialogue between the people making these medications and the people suffering through the side effects. Which community are you going to join? And those are long-term sustainable advantages that don't depend on the last New England Medical Journal's efficacy report. In terms of the narrative structures, though, if you lose stories with beginnings, middles, and ends, this is something I did like 10 years of courses on this at NYU just to study this thing. What replaces narrative, right? What forms create the equivalent of reversal and recognition, the traditional narrative structure, if you don't have linear narrative? And the main ones are you can go meta, if you will. It's like Mystery Science Theater or Beavis and Butthead, one of these things where you have a screen, inside a screen, like the movie Inception. You can create that sense of reversal and recognition, not by going linearly through the story to the aha, but by going, whoa, we've just framed out. Whoa, we've just zoomed out. Whoa, we've just done that. So you can create those. And obviously the application of that is multifaceted. You can also create closure, right, between 2 different things. If you read Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, what he talks about is the way that comics communicate is through various panels. And if a person has an idea in a comic, they're going to have a frame of them before the idea and a panel of them after the idea. So the light bulb went off in the gutter between the 2 things. It's the closure between those 2 images where the reversal happens. So again, it's not quite happening in a line, but it's happening between 2 things. And the other is making connections between different things for people. The satisfaction of The Simpsons, say, is not seeing whether Homer gets out of the nuclear power plant before it blows up. We don't care. He's going to be back next week. The pleasure on The Simpsons is identifying what's being satired here, what's being satired here. You make connections between this Simpsons scene and that Alfred Hitchcock movie and that Honeygrams commercial, and you get that sense of satisfaction because you're being oriented. You're being taught how to recognize patterns in this kind of fractal-like media space, rather than being brought to the father knows best conclusion.
Yeah, I think there are a number of ways that we could look at the whole storytelling landscape. Part of it is, again, that narrative structure, how do brands fit in that. We should actually come back to that notion of brand in a second. The way that we talk to our clients about it and think about it also is the notion of just access and presence. Having persistent presence around certain topics, issues that your organization should be associated with. And then from an access standpoint, let people in to understand what's happening in the organization in ways where they form their own stories about what's happening. And I think that's where, again, a big trend in the business right now is content. Everyone's talking about content these days. And the ability, again, to not just take the bigger picture brand philosophy, but how do you bring that into a media model where you are providing access and presence, where people are coming across your stuff is just, again, another way of thinking about it. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, this is why I'm trying to talk about the dimensional leap from a storytelling book model to a rule-writing video game model, right? Where you're not, I mean, you can be an author of this thing, or you can be the person who creates the rules through which all these people are going to interact. And those become stories in themselves as far as the media is concerned. So what I'm saying is, rather than doing the content of communication press release, what you do is you change a fundamental rule in the way the public interacts with the company. That becomes some news person's story because, oh my God, look what they did. They're letting these patients talk with the scientists who are making the cancer medication, or they're doing this, or they open this, or they provided access. The fact that you provided access becomes the story. But what you're doing, the actions you're taking as public relations people, is changing the landscape itself. And those are newsworthy events. It's the difference, though. You see, in Bernays' day, you got secondary media by doing a stunt, right? And the stunt, it would bloop, bloop, right? And you'd get that thing. You would do that thing. GM, bless their hearts, tried to do it with, remember those Sierra? What was that? That four-wheel drive vehicle they had, and they let people edit it. And they said the public can edit these commercials for the thing, and then everyone did these anti-gas guzzling commercials, and they had to take, it was this, kind of awful thing. And that was sort of the blip style, the we're going to try this thing, rather than, and it was access into what? And this is the thing, they only let you give people access to marketing. Great, we'll let you guys do our next commercial. We'll let you participate in this marketing campaign. We'll let you meet Beyonce. We'll let you. It's like, wait a minute, why don't you let me into the company rather than into the communications around the company?
Yeah, I think we progressed off that.
We learned.
In a lot of organizations where, again, back in the whole user-generated content boom, so to speak, a lot of people were playing around with that.
Oh, and it was the kind of thing I was telling people to do.
It was kind of jumping over the opportunity, which is, again, the notion of how do you let people in constructive ways, not necessarily destructive ways. And there's just all kinds of cases, to reference there. But let's come back to the notion of brand. Again, a really, central topic in our business. Based on a lot of the factors that you're talking about and we're going through now, PR has actually ascended into a really interesting place in helping companies figure out just the notion of brand and how do you get stories out. But based on the Keebler story, I get the read that you think brands are dead. Is that true?
Yes. I do think brands are dead. Brands of a certain kind. The brand as a verb, I think, can sort of live, but the brand as a noun is kind of dead. The brand as the cover. The brand as the way to hide the fact that this is just another factory making more crap. So we have this story for you to look at. Brand as distraction. Brand as camouflage is dead, right? Brand as locus, brand as zone, brand as a landscape, brand as culture is just coming. It's a matter of, you're not taking credit for things so much as enabling things to happen. So I do think brand can stay alive, just not in the way we've thought about it. It's going to be a nonfiction type brand, unless it's like a fashion or a perfume or something where you're buying the story, right? In that case, you're buying the ad, so it's an entertainment thing. The ad is supporting the product, not selling the product.
And identity value of being associated with that as well.
Right, because that's what you're paying for.
Right. So let's shift gears a bit.
Yeah.
There's a pretty consistent theme through the book on just the whole notion of crisis. Just as you have, again, organizations and individuals in a state of flux, just the opportunities to find yourself into some troublesome situations is more prevalent. I believe, one of the quotes that you had in there is, it's like navigating a table loaded with mousetraps. It's just crazy, and how you kind of work through these mazes is a core competence that companies are going to need to have. Good for the PR business, or bad because we're not going to get anything done?
No, it's good for the PR business if you learn to do pattern recognition, right? It's a matter, you can't drive through the chaos in this way. Oh, we're going to get our blinders on and put the thing in light, and I'm going to lead, right? That's not going to work anymore. Because what's happened, and I was describing it a little bit, is we're stuck in these feedback loops where it's really hard to tell cause from effect. In the old days, the very old days, a farmer, you put seeds in the ground, you wait 3 months, and you see what comes up. Right? If you put them too close, they come a little scraggly. Next time I'm going to try to do them a little further apart. A company, you put out a product, you see next quarter, how did it do on the shelves? We got to do more this, more that. Things are happening so fast now that you can't tell what's affected what. Did the marketing affect the product? Did the product affect this? Did this? It's all zipping around. But when things go around that fast, when you get these feedback loops, you get feedback and iteration. Right? It's a sort of a chaos effect, and you end up with a chaos field. So your field ends up looking much more like a fractal than some kind of campaign. And fractals can be analyzed. Fractals can be looked at, not by computers, but by people. You look at the landscape. It's kind of an Eastern thing, where instead of looking at the subject of the picture, you look at the landscape. You look at the environment in which this is happening. And the difference between PR and advertising, nothing against our brethren in advertising, is advertisers focus on the subject, where PR focuses on the landscape. That's our terrain. That's our zone. We change the world itself to make it more accommodating to the company, to the client. Right? And that's a whole different approach. It's not campaign-based. It's sustenance-based.
Yeah, and I think that's where data is incredibly helpful, because understanding that landscape informs you on what to respond to and, frankly, what not to. I mean, there's a risk in this chaotic environment of over-responding, of over-analyzing every single individual out there that may have a beef with your business practices. And so that information, can be very helpful, with the notion of navigating, again, a pretty complex environment out there.
Right. But, the sad thing is, I would say, with the data, don't let your clients see the real stuff. They'll freak out. They can't look. They can't be trusted with it. In other words, the only way to use big data is to sort of soften your gaze. You soften your focus and understand, oh, this is sort of, it's more like stepping out into the ocean, and you can feel the warm spots and the cold spots. And that feeling when you go out on the beach and then all of a sudden it's cold? Your client will think, oh my God, the ocean just got colder. Right? And you'll know, no, you move 2 or 3 feet to the right and you'll find another warm spot. It's like, it's okay, it's all, they can't do that. So data can't drive these sort of day-to-day decisions that way. Or certainly not, oh, the Twitter's verse is red, so let's start tweeting pink. It doesn't go like that. It's more a matter of seeing sort of big picture things, recognizing patterns, and then in a controlled way, understanding how can our culture be tweaked in order to be more accommodating to this thing that's happening.
Okay, before we turn over to questions, just the last bit on the book is that you also talk about the human cognition and the toll on that that's really changing our relationship with media, and even in some cases with each other. It's pretty insane out there. You're a busy guy living in this and also writing about it. How do you personally navigate it and not go insane in the process, provided you don't feel insane in the process?
I do sometimes. It's weird. I did really well right up to the time where this book got released. Right? After it did, I wasn't really in control of my schedule so much. But what I do is, it sounds so crazy and new agey, but we're amongst friends. You know, the human body evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. And over those hundreds of thousands of years, we developed all of these little subsystems and biological clocks, stuff they call, the biotemporal systems. And it's not just day and night and melatonin, and it's everything. There's all these systems that you don't understand. So you've got to be exposed to daylight and dark. Day and night is a really good fundamental rhythm that lets your body do the things it needs to do. But then I also started to become aware of lunar cycles. And it turns out over each week of the lunar cycle, there's 4 weeks in a lunar cycle, different neurotransmitters dominate your brain chemistry. First week of a new moon, you tend to be dominated by acetylcholine, which makes you open to new ideas and kind of peppy. Second week is serotonin, when you'll get a lot of work done. Third week is dopamine, party week, right? If you're assigning a big assignment on dopamine week, you're going to be screwed. Right? The last week is norepinephrine, which is very analytical, kind of cold, Obama-like systems thinking. If you understand even those rhythms, we're all in those rhythms all the time. It makes such a difference personally. When you're in that, you start to feel like you're in sync. So I schedule, okay, I'm going to do my interviews on acetylcholine week. I'm going to do my heavy lifting writing on serotonin week. I'm going to relax on dopamine week. I'm going to do my chapter analysis and sort of organizational stuff on norepinephrine week. If you understand that about a company, if you understand that about the audience of people who are going to receive things, when are you going to come out with your press release about some new product? Do it on acetylcholine week. When are you going to bury something? Dopamine week. When something you don't. It's easy. But if you understand those rhythms, you're like, wow, we can work with. That's the kairos of actual human experience. And it sounds like insanity to talk this way, but do you know that medical doctors, scientists, poo-pooed on jet lag? They didn't believe in jet lag till the early 60s, late 50s, when Major League Baseball managers noticed that pitchers did a lot worse if they traveled from the West Coast to the East Coast than if they traveled from the East Coast to the West Coast. It made no sense until they started to look under it. And then the State Department says, oh, what if we use this during negotiations? Right? Get people where they travel. That's why we like Iceland or don't like Iceland. Who's going to go what way? And then it became something, oh, well, there's actual medical evidence of it. So it's real. For me, it's been that, and it's been learning not to push. Things like banking, things like money, things like your accounts, they're all so stuck in chronos. But if you can start to look at things in your business more cyclically, you look at companies like Dunkin' Yo-Yos, say, who understand there's a yo-yo boom every 7 years. Whatever they do, they can't fight it. So they wait for 7 years. Oh, it comes yo-yo craze. Yay, like the cicada coming out. They go and they send all the people out and do the conventions and commercials and all. It's over, or back in like the toad under the ground. There's companies that are, Herman Miller does that. There's just these cycles, and you learn to ride them. If you don't have these shareholders who are asking for quarter over quarter, year over year growth every single time on a hockey stick-like progression, as if the world worked that way, which it doesn't. It spins around day, night, seasons.
Some deep thinking. I guess on that note, we'll turn it over to questions. Yeah. Who else wants to throw a question out there? Yeah, right in front.
I would dare say that the majority of people in this room, in one way or the other, are concerned about, quote, brands, either at the individual enterprise level or with the individual product lines. And I think a lot of us are charged with building brand equity, enhancing reputation, and so forth. Can you expand upon your the brands are dead before a whole bunch of us just go and jump out the window kind of thing? Don't jump out the window. Okay, here's one. Again, I'm not saying anything against or for any particular company. I have no allegiance. All right, but just to use companies as a way of understanding this, right? In the brand landscape, as it's sort of commonly understood, a brand like Coca-Cola, which is dependent on the legacy of its brand, it would be in a greater challenge situation than a brand like Pepsi, which has presented itself as this kind of living, changing, real-time oracle through the ages, right? It's when the brand is static
You know, when the brand's value is its history, is its legend, is its story, is its connection to that, it's a lot less stable in this sort of fractal, real-time, presentist environment than a brand whose value tends to be based more in this kind of real-time relevance, right? The sense of immediate relevance. It's hard, and then the reaction of the companies is, oh my God, you mean I got to be relevant every single day and keep doing it? It's like, no. You just have to really do the thing you do. You've got to slowly grow. You've got to keep on learning. You've got to be getting better. You've got to create emission-free factories. You've got to keep arming your ardent supporters with the ammunition they need to champion you. Do stuff that they want to talk about. And that doesn't mean flash in the pan publicity stuff that they want to talk about. It's your ardent supporters. So you understand, your PR, you know who the ardent supporters are of Apple. Who are those people who used to go and sit in the CompUSA and instruct other people how to use Apple so that they would switch? Right? You give them stuff, you give them things, right? If I'm Keebler, I want to give my Keebler fans stuff. So I'm going to try to come up with stuff not about the Huggies Bear or the Keebler Elves or Tony, but about the cereal. What do it's not what have you done for me lately? It's, I thought we're in a living relationship. You know, it's not a matter of oh, you've got to keep redoing your hairstyle to keep your mate. It's not that you have to keep changing your look, right, to stay up to date, to keep your marriage alive. You keep your marriage alive by staying in a living relationship. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask a question about. Thanks. Sorry. So we were talking about the GM advertising campaign where they came back, the customers came back with the ideas of gas guzzlers. Could they have taken that and made that into, say, a more relevant, less Kronos kind of I don't want to say campaign, a less Kronos kind of conversation, engagement, whatever, where they could have done something with it had they not backed away for fear that this was going to hurt their product? Could they have embraced it?
I mean, it's really hard to second guess because it was a different era, right? Now, you could do different things than 10 years ago when they tried to do that. You know, I heard them talking about BP before. You know, BP wasn't a similar thing, not about the oil spill, but BP when they did their Beyond Petroleum thing, and everyone got pissed off, and the shareholders pulled out and all that. And the employees, did they talk about this part? The employees were the ones who made them go back and do it, because the employees felt so committed to the Beyond Petroleum thing that they pushed it. That's a culture, right? And for however much they were accused of greenwashing, they were being honest about it. Look, we're trying. This is a step. We're trying to move towards this. We're clearly not there yet. We're an oil company trying to move beyond that. So yeah, I mean, coulda, woulda, shoulda. I mean, on the one hand, they did exactly what I probably would have suggested they do 10 or 15 years ago. Give your audience the tools to communicate. You know, it might have been a matter of making it bigger. You know, today you'd say, okay, fine. You want to get beyond gas guzzling? Let's create a site where now people can strategize. How are we going to move America into a less gas guzzling way? Do we want to do light rail? Do you want to do this? Let's get that conversation. GM is going to become part of the transportation of America conversation. You know, it's where Volkswagen knows, right? They know that we're moving beyond, we're going into hyper-urbanization, we're moving beyond car ownership, we're getting to the zip car and all that. They know. And they're looking, if you look at their plans, they're looking at that as the future. You know, so then rather than resisting it, how do you get behind that? You know, GM, to their credit, they rebuilt America around the needs of the automobile, right? Back in the 30s or whenever that was. They had that much at stake when they were a smaller company. You know, so they can lead that conversation if they're willing to go there.
So just to answer that question, then we'll wrap. Steve Harris, who was head of GM Communications at the time and beyond, is here. And there were a number of pretty remarkable things the company did do, learning off that event to really do exactly what you're talking about. So.